Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of React Roundup. I am your host today, Paige Niedringhaus, and we are joined by our panelist, TJ Van Tol.
Hey, everybody.
And our special guest today is Nirmalya Ghosh. And Nirmalya, I apologize in advance, but please say your name the correct way and tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. I think Nirmalya is the correct pronunciation. And happy to be here. I'll start by introducing a little bit about myself. I have been working in the development team at a company called Rapid API. I work in the senior developer programs engineer, and my job is to build all the code examples, build API stuff, build all the cool API stuff. I say cool because it's not actually related to the actual product, but I bridge the gap between developers who want to use the product and the developers who are building it, so bridging the gap between the code and the community. I also build a lot of interactive components, which helps visually understand what the API does or how you can integrate certain kinds of things with Rapid API. In short, Rapid API is like the GitHub for APIs, where a lot of APIs are available. And you can search for any type of APIs, like you want to visit a place, so you can search for hotel. You want to watch a match, you can search for APIs related to football and stuff like that. So my job is to look at those APIs and create integrations with various technologies, like, for example, React, Next.js, Vue on the front-end side. On the back-end side, it can be like Ruby on Rails, Python, Django, etc. So that's my day job. And when I'm not working, I am generally trying to contribute to open source projects. I have a few open source projects, which I try to maintain, but it becomes sort of difficult sometimes. And when I'm not working at all, when I'm not coding, basically, I try to play football as much as possible. And that's about me.
Hey folks, this is Charles Maxwood. I've been talking to a whole bunch of people that want to update their resume and find a better job. And I figure, well, why not just share my resume? So if you go to topenddevs.com/resume, enter your name and email address, then you'll get a copy of the resume that I use, that I've used through freelancing, through most of my career, as I've kind of refined it and tweaked it to get me the jobs that I want. Like I said, topenddevs.com/resume will get you that. And you can just kind of use the formatting. It comes in Word and Pages formats, and you can just fill it in from there.
Sounds like you've got a pretty full plate.
Yep.
So I'm curious. I definitely want to talk more about the APIs and the kind of stuff that you're building now. But the first thing that we actually asked you to come onto the show to talk about was something that I think a lot of developers have struggled with or have encountered, which is migrating a large code base to a new platform, like bringing it into React, bringing it into Next. And it sounds like you have actually gone through this process. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about how it was for you and some of the advice, tips, tricks, pitfalls you encountered along the way.
Definitely, that is like one of the most important or most challenging projects that I have done in my professional career. And the code base that I started working on was a monolithic Ruby on Rails application, which has like small React applications, client-side React applications split throughout. I'm talking about 2015, 2016-ish kind of space, where React just came out and we wanted to try out this thing instead of jQuery, which we all like. But like when React came out, we sort of wanted to experiment with it. But what we found out is that it's very difficult to make everything work together. Like, for example, there was no Redux, or Redux was not that much popular at that point of time. So when you want to make the sidebar, which is a React application, work with the navbar or the content area, which are different React applications, it becomes very difficult to connect. And micro frontends or stuff like those things were not that popular during that time. Or like they were there, but it was very difficult to make them work together. So I sort of took up the project along with my whole team, that we wanted to take that monolithic Ruby on Rails application and split it into two parts. One, the backend would be on Ruby on Rails, but it would only give you the APIs that are necessary. And on the front end, we sort of fought over a lot of frameworks. For example, we thought about Angular, we thought about a lot of other things, but
Mm-hmm.
eventually decided to use Next.js because the whole team, the development team at that point of time, which we had hired, were specializing in React. And it makes a lot of sense to use something which is popular. And thinking about now, I think I was one of the developers who wanted to use Create React app, but I think choosing Next.js was the right call, especially when you think about the stuff that has happened over the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
And I honestly, I learned a lot of things like how you can write code, manage code, and structure everything in a way which makes it possible to do that kind of migration. Like you're talking about a live app. You cannot stop the app. You cannot say that I won't push upgrades or bug fixes and I will only work on this new shiny stuff. It doesn't work like that. The business, the product managers will never let you do that. So like when I was thinking about doing this kind of migration, I try to research a lot, like how other companies or companies which has like big applications are trying to do this sort of migration. It doesn't have to be React specific, but it has to be like splitting the monolith into a front end and back end.
Mm-hmm.
And what I figured out during my research time is that it is possible, it is hard, but you have to do it in chunks. You cannot do the whole thing at once. You cannot say that I would pause everything for 1 month or 2 months. I mean, 2 months is a synonym. It generally takes like years, to be honest.
Yeah.
But you cannot say that I'll stop pushing upgrades for 2 months and work on only on this thing. And we are not even 100% sure if this is going to get into production, which is a different call altogether, right? Because a lot of projects start, but they never get into production.
Mm-hmm.
And what we decided during that point is start with the path of least friction. So take the part which we don't have a lot of visitors. So we took
Mm-hmm.
one page where we noticed that we were getting probably like 100 or a couple of hundred visitors in a span of 1 month. And we decided to take that and build a Nexus application only for that page. And when we started working on it, we figured that it's not easy. It's very painful because if you take your whole team and start doing that project, there will be a lot of like people will be stepping on each other's toes and it's
Mm-hmm.
not going to get forward. So we built a very small team, like 4 developers. One person will be responsible for the backend bits and the 3 person will be responsible for doing the front end stuff. Because we were splitting a monolithic application, we have to understand that the backend also needs to make modifications. It's not only about front end. So what we did is so we started that page and wrote an Next.js application. And after a few weeks, like the initial time is always hard for the first page.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm saying around like a couple of weeks to a little bit more than that. We got that page working, but on development. And we had no idea how to make that page work on production, right?
Yeah.
Because, like you have to think about authentication, authorization. It's not like a
Mm-hmm.
marketing page which anyone can use. It's a page under the cover of authentication.
Right.
So then, then we thought about how we can do certain things which will help us, right? So, I mean, this is like kind of a buggy way of doing it or not the ideal way. But what we did is like we performed the login or the authentication via the Rails application. And
Mm-hmm.
whenever you visit that particular page, which we revamped, if certain cookie was enabled based on a feature toggle, then we
Yep.
would redirect the user to that Nexus application. Now you have to understand like we were not using Bootstrap. Like the
Mm-hmm.
existing application was using Bootstrap, but like we were getting into the stage where design systems was the first, right? And
Yeah.
we wanted to try out so many things, but eventually use something like and design because we didn't want to invest more time into developing
Mm-hmm.
components. We wanted something that is already there and we wanted to just take the components and make it work. So we started working with that and it worked really well for us because when you look at it, like after a few months when a lot of developers started developing pages and started migrating in this way, like sort of cookie based or feature flag based approach.
Mm-hmm.
Initially, we were taking around like one sprint. Each sprint comprises of 2 weeks to deliver a single page with
Mm-hmm.
obviously a few complicated logic like tables, filters and stuff. Whereas we were able to complete after the migration in like 3 to 4 days. And
Wow.
like when you think about like 20 developers, it is a lot of time saved, a lot of bandwidth saved, and
Mm-hmm.
the development experience was really good. Like for example, when you're working with a monolithic application, which is all good, but for front end developers, you really don't want to work with jQuery, HTML, and that kind of. It also had CoffeeScript, but the thing is, what I'm trying to say is, after we did this migration, there were a lot of pitfalls at the start, but it started becoming smooth, and it became even smoother when we integrated TypeScript into that project. Like, like I wanted to use TypeScript because people are talking about TypeScript on Twitter, and I just wanted to try it out. And I wanted to try it on a big application here because I was stuck on small applications and they were working fine. And
Yeah.
the reasons that I wanted to use TypeScript was because I wanted to have type safety and
Mm-hmm.
autocomplete. Like I am a very lazy developer, and I don't want to like write long things together. I just wanted TypeScript to autocomplete and lessen the amount of bugs. Like, like when you have a big application and a lot of developers, copy paste happens, right?
Right.
It's something that you cannot predict and you cannot prevent. And using something like TypeScript really helped me in that way. I mean, like TypeScript was the first point where I realized that, okay, we are improving. Like there was no metric as such. You cannot really measure any metric like how is your development experience. So what we measured is the time taken to deliver a project and the developer happiness. Like, is the developer happy with the work? Is the developer happy with the feature that they have built and the number of issues that we're getting? We'll talk about it, like how we reduce the number of issues using Storybook, React Testing Library and stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
do you have any questions so far?
Yeah. So one thing I'm sort of wondering about, you're migrating from like Rails to Next. How did and maybe I didn't quite grasp this, but how did the two coexist? Because Next is very much kind of wants to control absolutely everything, right? Like, so like my brain is having trouble processing. The idea of migrating in chunks is amazing. Like, I think that's definitely the right strategy. I'm just struggling to figure out how that's even possible with Next because it
How
just wants
they
to own
lived
everything.
together and
Yeah.
All right. I'll just give you a little bit more context regarding that. So initially we were using React inside the Rails application. Like we are using like not Create React app, like client side React, like how you
Okay.
do right now on Code Sandbox.
Yep.
Right. You call unpackage.com/React and React DOM and you React DOM.render and you start the application there. So we had those things during that point of time. And when we decided on using Next.js, what we did is that we took a page and using Nginx and a few other things, which I didn't mention intentionally because right now it's not necessary. It's easier to do that. But using those sort of things, what we did is that after the authentication is done, we redirect the user based on a feature toggle to either the Rails application or the Next.js application. Like those were running separate. Like you can think about it that the Event Rails application is running on a different port and the Next.js application is running on a different. I'm talking about development, but you can think about the same thing on production as well. Like the URLs can be different. Also, one thing that I would like to mention is that when you started working with Next.js, to run Next.js, you needed to have a server. So it's on production. I'm not talking about like SSG, SSR. I'm talking about get initial props, that kind of state. So it was also difficult in certain way because we had to use Docker because our app was a multi-tenant application. So more complexity. But that's how we made the existing Rails application work with the Nexus application. Does that sort of make sense, or do you want me to dive deeper?
Yeah, no, I think that helps. It's just, I had a feeling there was some more complexity to it because it's not the easiest beast to tackle.
So yeah, I mean, like we already had like 5 or 6 failed migrations before that. So we took the lessons learned from that as well.
Yeah.
Revamps are always the hardest.
So one question that I had, because when I worked at my previous company, we did a similar migration from AngularJS to React. And one thing that we ended up having to do was take a lot of the logic that Angular held in the front end and create additional microservices that could serve up that information from the back end. So when you were kind of figuring out how to migrate your application, first, how did you decide which pieces to migrate? And and when? And then second, did you have to do the same kind of thing where you created new back-end services that kind of just could serve up the information to the React API or the React Next.js client?
That's a really good question because that is one of the issues that we also had encountered. The reason why we didn't build any separate backend thing out of the ordinary thing, like one job of the backend developer was to take the existing Ruby on Rails pages and spit out APIs from those things. But we didn't want to create anything out of the ordinary for the backend service because we wanted most of the logic to be on the front end. You have to understand, like in a real scenario, when you want to do a migration, it always makes sense to push complexity to the backend, and that's where you also started. But when you think about a realistic scenario, you always have like failed projects of migration, so you can understand like the trust of the organization on this project being successful and not being a mess is not that high. So you also have to address that we wanted to take the path which has the least friction. And like what you're talking about, that was also thought of. But we figured that if we want to do the backend, that has to be done before the front end starts working. So you can understand like it becomes like 1 month of extra work before the front end work starts. And that is something that no one was comfortable. Like even though we wanted to, because that would have made our life a lot easier, but people were really not that much sincere about doing something like that. So because of that reason, and the other reason was our APIs, we had the plan that we wanted to expose our APIs so that any third party application can consume the same APIs that we are using internally. Now, when you want to have something like that, there are two ways. Either push most of the logic or the business logic to the front end and let the back end be very simple, which is the path that we followed. The other thing was have two different set of APIs, one for the internal applications and one for the external ones. But those would take much longer, and we didn't have enough bandwidth to do something like that. And that is why we didn't follow that approach.
So then, are there any other pitfalls? Because we went through migrating that, but I think there were a few others you were going to mention.
There were actually quite a lot because when you think about like, okay, first thing is the organization bias is always there, right? Like if you want to build something which is like the main product, like you want to revamp the product that keeps the company alive. And I'm talking about a small start. I'm not talking about like a big MNC. You always have that budget restriction. So you always have to think about like, how can I do the most amount of work in the least amount of developer time? Right? I'm not talking about like months. I'm talking about developer time because that's the most cost that the company incurs, right? And the other thing was the product was using Bootstrap. It was using Bootstrap 2, Bootstrap 3, Bootstrap 4, three versions of Bootstrap together. You know, like any application which has been there for around more than 6-7 years has those kind of things. And like when you move away from Bootstrap to Ant, it's very difficult to make both of them work together and look consistent. So that was another challenge which we faced. But how we tackled that sort of, we couldn't make it exactly. But what we did is initially under the feature flag, we made the ant work as much as possible with the vanilla settings. Right, we modified the brand color and a few more spacing because Ant at that point of time only exposed SAS. In the recent one, which they released a few months ago, they are now in CSS in JS. So it's not a problem right now. But that point of time, it was using CSS variable. So we tried to modify the brand color. We modified the fonts and everything to make them look overall similar. And before we turned the feature toggle on for everyone, we took the Bootstrap part and configured it or modified it to make it look similar to Ant because we knew that the Bootstrap part was already messed up and it was not maintainable at that point of time. Hence the revamp. So what we did is that we wanted to add more mess to the existing stuff because we knew that we were going to throw that away and rewrite that with Ant design in the next couple of months/years. Based on the priority. So that was another challenge that we faced. The other challenge was because we are working with a multi-tenant application, you have to understand like we cannot just like there is only one application, one front-end application and one back-end application which spits out the API. So we had to use Docker for that because we wanted to make it work on our development, seamlessly on staging and seamlessly on production. Like the same thing. although there were a few differences because how asset compilation worked in Next.js at that point of time was a little bit different than how it works right now. Next.js does everything. At that point of time, it wasn't the case. It was difficult, and a few other things. Like on production, what I noticed is that this is something that developers who have done this sort of migration will know, is that everything works fine on development. On production, the CSS doesn't load or something gets
Yeah.
messed up, right? And
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure most developers who have been working for a few years have faced something like that. And honestly, that was very difficult to debug because we all knew that everything is similar. Like on development, it's Docker. On staking, it's Docker. On production, it's Docker. So why is it
Mhm.
breaking? It turns out that someone had upgraded a package and the package log file was messed up. And
Oh.
when you cleared that off, cleared the cache because Docker caches everything. When you clear
Yeah.
those things off, then only it started working. So I'm talking about like I wasted days on this, but I'm giving the answer in a few seconds. But honestly, it's very difficult to debug when something like that happens. And people like front-end developers are always scared of removing package lock or unlock file and start all over again.
Yeah, and adding a layer of Docker on top of that just makes debugging it that much worse.
Hey there, this is Charles Maxwood. I'm excited because I wanted to let you know about this thing that I pulled together that I've been dying to have this for years, and I never felt like I could. And then I just realized that there's no reason why I can't. So I'm putting together a book club, and we're going to read development-focused books, career books, technical books, whatever. The first book that we're going to do is going to be Clean Architecture by Uncle Bob Martin. If you're not familiar with Clean Code or some of the other stuff that Bob has done, check that out. I've also talked to him on the Clean Coders podcast, which is on Top End Devs. But we're going to get on. He's going to show up to some of our meetings. And what I'm thinking is we'll probably have like 5 or 6 people part of the conversation along with Bob and I at the same time. And we'll just, so somebody can come on, they can ask their question, and then we'll just rotate people through. So we'll mute one person, unmute another person when it's their turn to come on and be part of the discussion. So we'll do that for like an hour and a half. And then the other part of it that I'm putting together is just kind of a meet and greet gather area on GatherTown. And so after the meetup and the call, what we'll do is we'll all go over to GatherTown, and you can just log in, walk up to a group and have a conversation. And that way we can all kind of get to know each other and make friends and get to know people across the world. One thing that I'm finding is that, the meetups are starting to come back, but a lot of people don't have the opportunity to go to a meetup. And I really want to meet you guys and talk to you. So we're going to put all that together. It'll all be part of that book club. You can go to topenddevs.com/book club to be part of it. And I'm looking forward to seeing you there. The first book club meeting will be in December, the beginning of December. We're starting the first week of December. And you'll also be part of the conversation about which book we do next. I have one in mind, but I want to see where everybody's at. So there you go.
It was difficult because, we had recently added Docker to our application during that point of time. And then we started working on this migration. So the Docker already had a few rough edges at that point of time. It was not very smooth. And, it cannot say that, okay, it has to be very smooth and then we'll start on this migration. In a normal startup or a middle-sized startup, that thing is something it never happens. Some upgrade happens, you start working on the next, something gets messed up, you fix that, move on, come back again, fix it, move on. It's like that, right? So I'm not sure how it works in big companies, but I'm talking about a very small startup, and it became imperative that we had to work with what we have. And there were frictions, but we resolved them.
So how long did you think it was going to take to do this migration, and how long did it actually end up taking? Because in my personal experience, I think that we had budgeted for maybe 3 months. And when all was said and done, it took closer to 3 years, kind of on and off.
Okay. In our case, we had budgeted for around 3 months to 6 months. Why I'm saying 3 months to 6 months? Because 3 months for only the 4 developers, the initial developers who are working on it, and the rest of the 3 months for everyone, whole company to work on it. It took around 2.5 years.
Yep, that sounds right.
Yeah.
But there were a few good things because after 1 year, Next.js became very popular, and they started removing the a custom server that you have to run on production, and it became very fast compared to the previous versions. It became very fast, and React was also doing a lot of things which helped us in improving the performance. And there were a few breaking changes. So you have to understand, like, those things also took quite a bit of time, even though not all the developers are working on it. But when someone makes changes, something always gets messed up, and that's where days are lost because of those things, and you have to fix those things because someone is blocked. And sometimes it happens only on production, sometimes it happens only on staging. We all hate that when it doesn't, when it works on development but doesn't on the other environments. But those things were there, and we had to fix that. And at the end, like after almost like 1.5 years, we sort of knew that this is the right approach, because like the amount of time that we were saving and the code that we were writing, like everyone was able to understand the code that they were writing. Previously, it was like, I want to make this work and move on to the next project. Right now, it was like, okay, I have written this. How can I improve this? Because we were saving a lot of days writing code. And the code was, everything was in React and JavaScript. It was easier to reason, easier to debug. Server-side rendering was a bit tricky, but once you get the hang of it, it becomes very easy. Not very easy, it becomes easier. Client-side rendering, debugging, that is always easier on production at least. But when you don't have a lot of logging, okay, here comes logging. Initially, we didn't have logging on production. So when something goes wrong in a server-side environment like Next.js, it became very difficult to debug. But we sort of use technologies like Datadog and all, where we got logs and tried to figure out how we can make it work, where the issue was happening. And that was another issue that I was talking about earlier.
Well, I will say, for one thing, it sounds like you picked Next.js at around the right time, because you should have like got in on the investment front or something, because they're taking off. I actually am curious. Like, as we're recording this, Next 13 was just announced, like I think like a week or a few days ago. Have either of you been following along with any of that? Or are there any of the new features you're excited about or want to try out?
I mean, yeah, it all sounds great. It sounds like we said maybe before we started recording, there's a lot of breaking changes that Next.js 13 is bringing, but it's I mean, it also sounds like the React team has gone completely in on Next. You know, they've got the server rendered components, they've got suspense, they are integrating data, all the concurrency stuff. I don't know. I honestly wonder how long Create React app is going to continue to be its own thing, because it seems like the React core team is really betting big on Next, which is cool and also scary at the same time because they don't own Next. And so it'll be interesting to see. But I mean, I'm really interested in it. I'm just a little bit concerned about the path to upgrade because there are so many changes that are really big changes.
To be honest, this was one of the picks that I wanted to discuss. But since we're doing it right now, yes, I'm very excited about Next.js 13, the new release. And like in Rapid API, we're building this platform of blogs, interactive documents. And my manager, Amit Awis, he gave a talk in that conference where he spoke at length about how we are developing things like this. So yeah, I'm very excited. And honestly, because like I always wanted to have a system or a framework or a library or anything like that. It's confusing, I know, but which sort of does the work for you, and you don't have to understand. I mean, if you want, you can understand, but you don't have to understand everything that's happening. Like Next.js, if you want to understand how stocks are happening, you can understand. But like for example, like when you are a senior, it makes a lot of sense for you to dig deeper into applications or frameworks to understand what's happening. But a company has senior developers, middle developers, and junior developers. So a junior doesn't have to do everything. Next.js or React in particular has this new way of fetching data, which becomes very easy because when you are building Next.js and you want to sort of fetch data in the component, you cannot do that, right? It doesn't work. I mean, you can use effect and all, but it's not the ideal approach. It's not a wrong approach, but not the ideal one. Like if you want to make a fast application or maintainable application, you sort of have to use like get static props or get initial props or get server-side props or something like that. Whereas when you have something like this, like React use, something like that, it becomes very easy to reason about. It becomes very easy to help juniors understand, like, okay, this is the way you fetch data. You don't have to worry about those three different functions: get server side browse, get static browse, and those things. And to be honest, like when I'm working with a framework, I don't want to remember those things. I mean, obviously, after you work with it for a few weeks, you always understand or remember those things. But I don't want to. I want to just write the main logic for the code and make it work. To fetch data, it should be very seamless and very easy to reason about. And I think like the path is correct. Like React is going the correct path where it's sort of evolving from a library to a framework sort of thing, where it's not only a view layer anymore, but it also thinks about how you can get the data, sort of manage the data with React context and those kind of things. And I really like this approach. I really like the part that it's going. I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah. What's your take on it, TJ? Have you been keeping up with all the announcements and debuts?
I've been keeping up, but not so much of the features. I'm more just fascinated by the fact that they're running like Apple style events with like, and just the like the amount of money in it and the smooth video and the transitions. Like it's kind of weird. Like we're entering a weird space in the front end world where there's like this venture capital money behind some of these frameworks. Remix was just bought by Shopify. Like it's like I'm sort of fascinated from that angle. And it gets at what you said, page 2, with like the React team is like a core part of this. And it's like such a weird business aspect for like Meta, for this company that makes this framework for free, is partnering with Next.js, this like VC backed thing with a hosting platform. I'm just sort of curious where all that is going. But at the moment, it's still like at the end of the day, my job as a developer is to use really the best tool for the job. And I mean, we used Next for Paige and I use it all the time and we'll continue to use it. So I think they're heading technologically in the right direction.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the thing that stuck out to me, was just like the craziness of how big and like well produced their release announcements are. And I've yet to get into like specific features. So that's kind of why I asked, right? I'm curious to check them out.
Yeah, same.
One thing that I'd like to mention here is that like people who have been working with React for a few years, they will remember that sort of similar issue was there with the license of React a few years ago.
Yeah.
That also has been resolved. So I think that it's going in the right direction when you think about it. Like, for example, the framework called Astro, which is a framework I really like, but that is also backed by a company. The framework called Quick, which is a very new framework which spits out Node.js or whenever necessary. That is also, I think, done by Builder. So that is also a company. I think that it's fine, like except Vue, everything is backed by a company. It can be like small, it can be as big as Google, Facebook, or stuff like that. But I think like right now the environment is really good. Like if you're a JavaScript developer, you're already getting the shiny toys to work with.
No, I agree. It's open source. Like to their credit, Next.js is still completely free to use, and you could argue that it is a more sustainable way of paying people to work on these frameworks, honestly. So I'm not even arguing that it's a bad thing. I'm just saying I'm just sort of fascinated by how it's all playing out.
Yeah, the VCs have gone from backing tech, or I guess tech companies with a product, to backing tech companies building the tools to build products, which seems like a good investment. And I like that, like you said, it supports open source. It makes it more sustainable and more stable, and less of a chance that the open source maintainer will just burn out and have to get a day job to pay their bills. So yeah, I think it's a good move. We'll see how it turns out, I guess.
All right, so we also definitely wanted to talk about Rapid API a little bit as well. So I want to make sure we have some time to get into it. And you gave us a little bit of an intro to it already, just a quick way of using APIs. I am curious, like, what is the business model there? Is it like something that's free to use? Like if I just want to use APIs, can I use it? Do you charge? How does all that work?
Okay, so coming to Rapid API, as I mentioned, it's like GitHub, but for APIs, where we have a hub where a lot of APIs are already present, and you can take those APIs and start building your application. You don't have to worry about building back-end part of your application. You can choose any front-end application and then start using it. Or if you want to use our APIs instead of one of your microservices, you can also do that. Like if you are only building a back-end application, but you don't want to build separate application for fetching away the data. You can sort of use one of our popular APIs from Rapid API Hub and use that to build your own application on the backend part of it. Your front end can work as it is. And we sort of give the freedom to the developers that are hosting their APIs. Right? There are two parts to it. One is like a developer builds an API and then they list it or enlist that on the Rapid API Hub, and they can put restrictions like they can add pricing tiers to it. They can say like, okay, you can do like 200 API calls per day, but if you exceed 200 API calls, then you have to pay this much amount of money per 100 API calls. They can also have like a free tier, which we call premium. If you have like a premium part associated with it, like after you exceed 200 API calls, then you will be charged. Some APIs are fully premium, where to use them, you have to sort of pay something or pay an amount to use the APIs. So it depends on the developer or the company who is giving access to the API or enlisting them on Rapid API Hub. And let's say you want to use that API to build your own stuff. So someone who has already hosted an API, you can search for it and you can find like, okay, this is the way that API I want to use. I don't want to invest my time, my company's time, or my developer's time to build something like this from scratch. I want to use this API from Rapid API Hub. So you create an account, you subscribe to that API, and if it's a free API, you can just start using that. If it's a premium one, you sort of have to like add your payment details to get that access to work with that API. So that's how Rapid API works for connecting the API and getting the API data. But there are other parts to it. For example, when you are a developer and you want to host your API, you can sort of earn money based on how popular your API is, how many users are using your APIs, and how many API pings are happening on your endpoints, right? And we sort of have built this kind of infrastructure where we make everything very secure. We have like rate limiting built in. We have a few other security, like vulnerabilities testing and all those things inbuilt. We also have rapid API testing, which helps you test your API. So we call it Rapid API Studio, where you can use our studio to build your APIs and then use that data in your application or let others consume that data. Right? It's two-way. One is consumer, another one is provider. It sort of depends on what type of model you are looking for. And recently, we launched a VS Code extension, which is very helpful if you want to test your APIs or you want to generate types, because the VS Code extension, which is called Rapid API VS Code extension, you sort of install that and you do an API call to any APIs. And whenever it returns a response, you can sort of check out the schema. You can also do GraphQL API calls. You can also, which is my favorite part, is get types from it. And being a front-end developer who works with TypeScript throughout this whole day, it helps me a lot because you sort of like responses are always unknown. You can never predict all the time how it's going to send the response or what response is it going to send. It can also fail. So based on the response that your API returns, our VS Code extension generates types automatically based on the schema of the response. And you can save that schema or the types generated by the extension in your application and start referencing that. So that is one thing that I have been using for building my Next.js application. Like Rapid API Guides is a Next.js application which we have built where we write about API development stuff. Like for example, how can you use GraphQL? How can you use GraphQL in an application? How you can use REST APIs? And the not so popular in the startup environment like SOAP APIs and other kind of APIs like async API. Right? We also have covered those things because we wanted to be like the MDN for API documentation or API kind of stuff. Right? We also have another platform which is called Rapid API Learn, which is rapidapi.com/learn, where if you go, we have curated like how you can learn about GraphQL, how you can learn about REST APIs. What the hell is a REST API? Like, what does it do? How can I use that? Because as a junior or as a beginner, you always hear about stuff like REST API, GraphQL API, but they don't have any clue. We have all been in those shoes. So we wanted to build something which handholds you throughout that whole journey and helps you understand that this is an API. This is how you do API calls. This is a REST API. This is the GraphQL. This is the difference. And if you're interested, this is the SOAP API. This is async. Because, like even though we don't really use those last two, like async API or SOAP API, but it's always good to know about those things and what those things are. And as a process, my job there was to build out this cute little markdown components or interactive markdown components where you can play with it and then you can just understand like, okay, you are doing an API call based on the click of a button. That dot is going to the server and the server is returning some data, which is showing inside a monitor of sort. So, like it's not boring only about text and you just read it and then forget about it. It sort of like gives you the illustration of how this kind of stuff actually works. And we also have Rapid API courses where we work with like third-party YouTubers where they create courses using how they can use Rapid API APIs and build applications. So it's rapidapi.com/courses.
Cool.
Yeah. Sorry. We also have one more thing, which is Rapid API Comics. If you visit our Twitter at twitter.com/rapid_API, you can see like we have written a lot of comics, which are illustrations to show how API works. I think that is a really popular thing on Twitter. I'd urge you to check it out if possible.
Yeah, no, in general, I think your idea here, the company is I think you're onto something because I work in developer relations, and as such, I build a lot of demo apps that need a lot of random APIs. And I can tell you from years of experience that it's the Wild West if you just go onto a Google search and go looking for an API, because you'll find stuff, but you'll find this API and you'll go, okay, what in the world is this? Does this even work? Because sometimes you'll find some API somebody built 5 years ago and isn't maintaining, or it's like some flight status stuff, but it's only like returning like historic flights. Not like you don't know if you can trust it. You don't know how much it costs. You don't know if it's even going to work.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So I like the idea of having a platform that kind of aggregates all of this. And it sounds like you have some really cool tooling and such around it. So yeah, I wish you the best because it sounds like a really good idea.
Yeah.
Thank you. And that is exactly how I came to know about Rapid API initially before I joined the company. I was trying to build something for my own blog. And when I was searching for something, Rapid API popped up. And that's when I came to know about like, okay, something like this is there. Maybe use the free tier to build certain things which I wanted to write tutorials about.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to check this out in the future when I need something like this. But I mean, we could talk to you all day because this has been really interesting and informative. But I think that we should try and wrap it up and get into the picks section. But before we do, where can people find you online if they want to get in touch or learn more or just talk to you about, their own migration issues or API needs?
Definitely. So I can be found at twitter.com/Ghosh Nirmalya. So it's my surname before my first name. Sorry. Mm-hmm. It's github.com/Ghosh Nirmalya. So my surname before my first name. And on Twitter, it's my first name, last name _.
And we'll make sure to put links in the show notes. So
thank you. I appreciate that because like it's on Twitter. I just wanted to have like the same thing on GitHub and everywhere, but I couldn't find it. And it's difficult when you have a name which is slightly difficult to pronounce.
We can relate.
Have you ever wished that you had a group of people that were just as passionate about writing code as you are? I know I did. I did that for most of my career. I'd go to the meetups. I'd try and create other opportunities. And it was just really hard, right? The meetups, I got some of that, but they were only like once or twice a month. And it was just really hard to find that group of people that I connected with and really wanted to, talk about code a lot, right? I mean, I love writing code. I think it's the best. And so I've decided to create this community and create it a worldwide community that we can all jump in and do it. So we're going to have 2 workshops every week. One of those or 2 of those every month are going to be Q&A calls, right? Where you can get on, you can ask me and another expert questions. The rest of them are going to be focused on different aspects of career or programming or things like that, right? So it'll go anywhere from like deployments and containers all the way up to managing your 401k and negotiating your benefits package. We'll cover all of it, okay? And then we're also going to have meetups every month for your particular technology area. So we have shows about JavaScript, React, Angular, Vue, and so on. We're going to have meetups for all of those things. I'm going to revive the freelancer show. We'll have one about that, right? So you can get started freelancing or continue freelancing if that's where you're at. And I'm working on finding authors who can actually do weekly video tutorials on something for 10 minutes that's related to, again, to those technology areas so that you can stay current and keep growing. So if you're interested, go to topenddevs.com/sign up and you can get in right now for $39. When we're done, that price is going to go up to $75. And the $39 price gets you access to 2 calls per week. The full price at $150, which is going to be $75 over the next few weeks, that price is going to get you access to all of the calls and all of the tutorials and everything else that we put out from Top End Devs, along with member pricing for our remote conferences that are coming up next year. So go check it out, topenddevs.com/sign up.
All right, so we're going to move into the picks section of the show, and this is where our hosts and our guests talk about things that they think are cool. Could be movies, could be kitchen tools. We've done a lot of those lately. Could be good shows that you're watching or books that you're reading. So TJ, would you like to kick us off today?
Sure. I'm going to pick an article that's titled "Welcome to Hell, Elon" on The Verge. And I'm neither pro Elon or anti Elon, but I'm sort of pro chaos because I'm super entertained by all of the craziness of him acquiring Twitter and all the drama afterwards. And this article is it's somewhat of a comedic take on it, but it also like walks through some of the actual logistical problems that come with content moderation and all the stuff behind Twitter. So it's written by a guy that used to be a copyright lawyer, so he has some background on some of the stuff that goes into that. So I check it out. If nothing else, it's just an amusing read. If you're as fascinated by all the Twitter drama as I am.
Nice. That sounds good. I mean, I have been watching the Twitter drama from afar, and it seems to just be getting more dramatic. So that sounds definitely like a good one. Nirmalya, would you like to give us a pick?
I was thinking about next year's week Astro, but we have been through that already. I mean, okay, let's talk about it anyways, a little bit more deeper into it. Because, like with the release of next year's 13, last week or a few days ago, it struck me that, okay, everything is working fine and one framework is taking inspiration from other frameworks. And it's always nice to see that because it's not the first time that it's happening because Angular sort of created something. React also had that. Vue also copied certain things from Angular. React also copied certain things from Vue and Angular. Angular also did the same thing. So it happens. Like it cannot be like everything is from scratch and everything is from new. And when I notice certain things like, okay, this is how it's happening, it's always a good thing because like for developers and for people who want to get into this kind of system like juniors or someone who is in college and wants to get into certain things like this, based on whatever is happening, it becomes very easy for them to understand like these are the topics that they need to understand because these are the popular ones. And I don't think like it's a bad thing to like take inspiration from other things because that's how designers design, that's how developers code. Like we copy paste stuff from Stack Overflow directly. So I mean, it's always fine to do something like that. And what I sort of want to say is that whatever happens on Twitter, on LinkedIn, or on any other place, I think for developers, it's always a very nice thing because they sort of understand like this framework is like this framework is like this. You don't have to understand the differences. But if you want to like build something, you want to get a job, you can work with certain things which is the most popular at that point of time. And if Next.js copies certain things from some other framework and other things copies from certain other things, it's always good for us because we get the shiny new things. And personally, I'm very excited about the new layouts, because that was one thing which I really liked about Remix. I really liked about Spell. I really liked about Astro. It was one thing which was slightly difficult or needed more code in Next.js, but I'm very happy that it's there right now, and I cannot wait to play with it.
Nice. That is a good one. And I agree with you. It's everybody copies everything from each other, especially the things that users and developers tend to really like. So it's just nice to have those things and have that familiarity, even if it's a new framework that you're starting with, being able to kind of connect the dots from something that to something that's new, I think is really a good experience for developers. So yeah, I say, take all the good ideas from each framework and make the next ultimate one from it.
I would definitely build applications using that.
Yeah.
It's sort of like praising the other framework. Like, okay, this thing was better in your system, but mine wasn't that great. So I copied it
Yeah.
over. And it's always like giving like sort of praise to other people. Like, for example, if I like someone and I get inspiration from him or her, I want to be like that person. Like, it's a good thing. Like, I am like inspired by that person. So it's always a nice thing.
Yeah, agreed. All right. So my pick for this week is going to be a TV show that I have been binging lately, and that is Star Trek Strange New Worlds. So I've been on a Star Trek kick from Next Generation and then just forward, and finally made it up to Strange New Worlds, which is one of their newest ones. And man, even the jump in graphics and storytelling and everything from Enterprise, which was back in the early 2000s, to now is just amazing, especially when you've been watching it and then immediately go forward in time. So if anybody is looking for a new sci-fi series and you have not checked out Star Trek, I would say do like I did and start from Next Generation, which is, Patrick Stewart and one of the best actors in the Star Trek franchise by far. But Strange New Worlds is awesome. The acting is great. The story is really good. And it was really a fun watch. So I'm looking forward to the next season that comes out.
Very fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that is all we have for this episode of React Roundup. So thank you for joining us, Nirmalya. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Happy to be here. It was great meeting and talking to both of you.
And we will see everybody on the next episode.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.